I have with me today Andrew. Andrew is our product manager and also our content editor here at Musical U. He's a music educator with decades of experience, performing musician as well. He's got several groups on the go at the moment and plays a wide variety of instruments. Andrew is a highly capable improviser himself and is actually in charge at the moment of developing our improvisation roadmap inside Musical U. So I sent him a message about 15 minutes ago to say, panic, Steve is not going to be here, can you step in? And so I have to give a big thank you to Andrew for jumping on this call and stepping in to present his own perspective on the improviser's mindset and also share a little bit of how we approach it inside Musical U.
Hello, everybody. So here we are, we're improvising. Christopher was talking about the difference in improvising and the traditional music mindset. And it really is, it's a mindset that sets them apart. So let's say you're learning a song. As a classical musician, I grew up playing classical music, and there was all these dots and squiggles on a page, and I was trained to follow those dots and squiggles and do what they said and do what my teacher said and do what everyone else was telling me to do to make this piece of music and to have it come out, play the same notes each time I played the music. Of course, you can make beautiful music that way. And that music was composed by somebody else who wrote it down. With improvisation, when I improvise, I'm the composer and I'm the performer. So I am composing and performing at the same time. And so that's a skill that may seem kind of magical, where I can just kind of make something up and have it sound good. But it is something that I can learn. Just like I'm talking to you now, I'm making it up as I'm going along, and you have conversations all day, every day, where you're not thinking and composing and writing down what you're going to say before you say it. You just get out there and start talking, and it all comes out. Hopefully it comes out the way you want it to. Sometimes it doesn't, and you make corrections. You get feedback from your audience, when you're speaking, and sometimes that feedback isn't that good, You might say something wrong to your girlfriend or something like that. But you make corrections and you make adjustments, just like we're making today with this class. And you move on and you create something. And because you are a master of language, you've been studying language since you were born, and you've internalized it, made it a part of yourself. You're a master of speaking of the spoken language. You're able to shift gears. You're able to think in that language. When you think, you're thinking in words, you're able to shift gears and do something different when needed be. And that's improvisation. We all improvise all day long. Improvisation is just making choices in the moment. You go to the grocery store, am I going to buy the yogurt or the potato chips? You make a choice, you improvise. So buy the yogurt. I'm telling you, no, that's not improvising. You improvise, you make the choice. Improvising is about you making the choices, or whoever's making the choices. When I'm making the choices about what's happening, that's my authority. That is coming from me, my choice about what I'm going to do, what's going to happen, what I'm going to create. So with music, improvisation is going to become more possible, just like it is with language and with life. It becomes more possible the more I master the language. Just like when a child is learning to speak, I don't know if any of you have children. I think all of you were at some point. But when a child is learning to speak, a lot of times the first step in learning to speak, of course, there's a lot of listening that goes on. But then the first step is trying to use that apparatus. How am I going to use this tongue and this throat and the sounds to make sounds, and then to put those sounds to make sense? So when a child is learning speech, they're just babbling, blah, 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 blah. I remember each of my children had a certain syllable that they came up with. So the first one, my firstborn, her first syllable was ba. And all day long, she crawled around going, ba, 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 ba. And then my second son, my second born, his was ga. And he just walked around going, ga, ga, ga. You know, they each had a different syllable, and they would learn this syllable, and they practice it and practice it and practice it and practice it until they mastered that syllable. And of course, to those syllables were added other syllables and other syllables. And one day, my daughter discovered she could say bug, and she would point at every little bug and go, bug, bug, bug. No, I'm not pointing at you. It's bug. So she would point at things and say bug, and she would learn to do that and acquire more and more vocabulary and more ability to express. And what's cool about that, when you learn language, it's not only a development of this apparatus, but it's developing your mind. So when we learn music, we're also developing and creating things in our mind. And we start hearing things differently than we did before. I'm going to stop here and take a breath. Okay, so when a child is making those sounds, the first thing they're doing is they're making sounds. It's the sounds that come first, and then the listening. Okay, I just said ba. And I know that mommy, when she looked at that thing, she called it a bug. And I said ba. It doesn't sound quite right. What can I do? I'm going to try ba, ga, bug, bug, bug until I can say bug. I'm going to try different things to make it sound that way. So I'm doing a little backwards of what I was going to really do, but like the first thing when a child's coming up, they play. It's like they're making sounds, and then they're listening to the sounds and saying, that sounds like I want it to sound. That doesn't sound like I want it to sound. So when we first start improvising, a lot of times we just pick up our instruments and we start making sounds. But our goal is, what we really want to do eventually is to hear the sound first and then imitate it. First of all, we hear sound in our environment. We might hear somebody that we admire. It might be Prince. It might be Louis Armstrong. It might be somebody that you admire musically, and you want to imitate them. So you're learning their licks, and you're learning their riffs, and you're copying their riffs, and you're, learning that, screaming Locrian metal riff, and you're learning how to do this. You're copying somebody else. So you're listening first, and then you're learning how to play that. But then you want to be able to do that in the flow, where you hear something and then you play it. So where are you hearing that thing? We've differentiated two things. I want to just make this clear. We have listening and then playing. And we have playing and listening. Listen, play is where you hear something and then you play it. And then play, listen is when you're playing something and you listen to it and you make corrections. And both of these are very valuable approaches to improvisation, and they complement each other. But the third ingredient, the thing that brings it all together, like I said, where is this music? Where are we hearing this music? Well, if you're like me and like everybody else, you've got this soundtrack going in your head. You've got this music accompanying your life all the time. You got something going on up there, a melody, a song, your favorite song. You might have an earworm and or something, song that's repeating in your head, or it might be something that's being created. You might be hearing symphonies. You might be hearing the blues. You might be hearing something that, goes along with your mood. And so taking this music that we're hearing in our head and bringing it out. When we hear music in our head, the term for that is audiation. It's spelled Audiation, and spell check doesn't know what it is. So you have to teach spell check, because every time I write audiation, which is a lot, I have to challenge spell check on that. So someday I'll figure out how to add it to the dictionary. Anyway, so audiation, add it to your dictionary. Audiation is hearing the music in your head. And we don't take it for granted. We have this soundtrack going, but we can develop that skill as well, where we can be more purposeful about the music we hear in our head. We can be hearing something, like thinking about what's next, thinking about what's next. So what is the skill then? Is to take what's in here and reproduce it on our instrument, okay? That is what we call a listen-play approach. And then we hear that. It didn't come out quite right, but it might have come out cooler, like we even heard it in our head. And then we interact with that. That's playing and then listening again to what we're playing. And then we make adjustments and so on. So there's these different, this is like the trifecta of improvisation. Listen, play, and audiation, okay? Now, this brings in some other ideas about improvisation. So a lot of times when people first learn to improvise, they learn patterns, all right? They're learning patterns. You have these patterns, and you learn to do these patterns up and down your fretboard, or you learn to do arpeggios on your saxophone or something like that. You study patterns, and you study these patterns, you learn them, you get them under your fingers. And that's cool, that's great. The downfall of that approach is that can become a trap, where all your solos are going to sound pretty much the same, where you could play that solo without even hearing it because your fingers are doing it. It's not your mind that's doing it. So to make your solos really meaningful and really musical, it's important to take these patterns and to internalize them, and also to direct them with your mind, where you're really coming from within. And so it's, even if you can like rip a guitar solo, going back to this basic process of hearing something in your head and bringing it out is a really good skill to learn. So how are some ways that we can learn this pattern? Even if you know your scales backwards, forwards, inside out, and you can rip all kinds of improvisation. Something like I could really jam, you know, and then, but when I learned about the kind of exercises of really slowing things down and really being conscious and really being aware of them, it just opened up my improvisation in an amazing way. Okay, so someone's asking for some concrete examples, and I'm going to give some now. One thing, so right now I'm just going to pick up this little flute I found laying around here, and I'm going to just wiggle my fingers in a pattern. Okay, so I've made this little minor chord arpeggio, and I listened to that and I said, okay, it'd be kind of cool if I changed something about it. I'm listening to it. I'm gonna go slower. Let me slow down here. Okay, so I listened to that, what I just played, and then I heard a note in my head. Went, ba. I heard that note in my head. To go up to the next octave on that arpeggio. So I'm hearing another note in my head. Ba-da. And I'm going to follow the notes in my head now. Right, so the last few notes, it's something I heard in my head, and then I reproduced it. So I listened to what I played, it inspired me to the next note and the next note, and before I knew it, I was hearing something in my head, and I was reproducing it. Now, of course, in order to do that, I have to have the connection with my instrument, where I have to be able to play a note, and then, you know, think a note, and then play that note. But even if I don't have that connection yet, if I even try to play something that I'm hearing in my head, it might come out something different. And then, then I listened to that. I said, well, what can I do with that? Where do I want to go with that? So it's this constant process going on in my mind when I'm improvising. You know, a lot of times, sometimes we get in this zone and we're just like, wah! Music is coming out, pouring out. We're not thinking about it. Okay. But in my experience, for me, that's pretty rare. A lot of times I have this process going on where I'm hearing, I'm listening to what I said. I'm thinking, what am I going to do next? I'm making choices. I'm making decisions. I'm remembering what I played, and I'm moving forward with it. That's exactly what happened just then. It was an interaction, a process of going back and forth. So, now the thing is to think about also, what can we improvise with? So what are we using? What are our raw materials? The first thing we always think about is notes, okay? Notes. We have all these notes. I want to play this note, that note, that. I want to play, 8 zillion notes in 5 milliseconds. But there's a lot of other parts to making music than just notes. There's a lot of other musical elements, or what my friend Christopher likes to call dimensions, okay? So notes is one dimension. Another dimension would be rhythm, okay? So I'm going to break down, I'm going to take the notes out of the equation so I can start focusing on some other dimensions. I'm going to play one note, a one-note improvisation. I'm just going to play this note. Okay? Now, what can I do with that note? Well, I can play with the rhythm. So I'm playing with the rhythm, all right? Making up different rhythms. That was pretty fast rhythms. I can also go slower. So playing with the rhythms, different rhythms. And then when I'm just focused on that one little element, I can get a lot more creative with rhythm because I'm really just focusing on rhythm. Now, other dimension, for example, one thing I can do with a single note on my instrument is I can play a vibrato with this thing here. I think that's coming through, and I can change the vibrato. I can do a fast vibrato. Just holding one note out, changing the vibrato, exploring all the dimensions I have to do with that vibrato. Other dimension, of course, is dynamics. I can do other things with timbre. You know, I can like sing while I'm playing. Playing with different dimensions, different musical elements, everything you can think about music, articulation, rhythm, dynamics, tone, timbre. These are all different dimensions that we can explore in our improvisation. And when I take all the notes out of the equation, I start to learn about how to do that. So now, let's say I want to put notes back into the equation. Now I have all those other dimensions. I'm aware of them. I have those in my mind. I'm going to add 2 more notes in. I'm going to do 3-note improvisation. But I'm going to also use my other elements, use rhythm, use tone, use vibrato, etc. So my 3 notes. Okay, here we go. I used a lot of variation in rhythm. I used variation in articulation. I kind of slid around on the notes. The other thing I did is I really held back on that third note. I waited a long time. So when it came, it was like, finally, this guy's playing another note. You know, so it made that note so much more important because I waited. You know, I didn't go and decide, okay, I'm going to really impress you with my cool solo. See how many notes I can play all at once, you know, burn out all my notes. And like, okay, 5 seconds, all my notes are gone. So you can treat your notes like this precious jewels, and you're just going to give out one at a time, you know, just add one at a time. And it can add so much interest and creativity and dimension to your improvisation. Okay, so how do I know which 3 notes to use? You pick whatever notes you want. And those notes, let's say I pick those 3 notes. I don't even know what the notes are on this thing, concert pitch-wise, but if I was playing a regular flute, this would be F, G, and A. You perfect pitch people out there, you probably know better, F sharp, G, and A, something. Anyway, 3 notes. I picked 3 notes that were right next to each other. You might want to try picking notes that are a leap or whatever, but you stick to those 3 notes when you do this exercise, and that's like your playground, okay? You've built your jungle gym. That's what you're going to climb on. You have that structure. That's your structure. You can climb on that structure. You can go to the top and look down. You can stand at the bottom and look up. You could climb up one rung at a time. You could play and run along one, like it's like one little balance beam, one note, you know, and then you can jump up to the next one. That's your playground. And you can build your own playground equipment with your music. It's a lot faster and a lot easier than going out and doing it in the yard. I know because I have an unbuilt playground sitting in my backyard right now. It's been there for, I think, 7 years. So, but you could do this with your music. You could choose your dimension. So let's say I'm going to do a 3-note improvisation. There's another other improv dimensions that you can do. One really cool one that I like is a time thing. You know, so where I say, okay, I'm going to do a 10-second improvisation. All right, so let's say 10 seconds. I'm going to guess. I think that was about 10 seconds. All right. So you say, I'm going to do 10 seconds. You get your little timer out, but you don't look at it, you know, and then you try and see, can I get in 10 seconds? And then you say, okay, I'm going to do 20 seconds. Okay, I'm going to do 5 seconds. Try different time dimensions. And by focusing yourself out, by giving yourself what we call a constraint, by putting a box around it, it actually brings out your creativity along all the other dimensions. So it's a great way to revitalize your improvisation. If you're like totally bored with your solos, it's like, oh gosh, I played the same pentatonic scale 7,000 million times. What else can I do with this thing? Try just think, okay, I'm not gonna play the whole scale. I'm just gonna play 3 notes, and I'm gonna only do it for 20 seconds. And I'm gonna focus on my vibrato. And you'll be amazed what comes out. So, question here. How do I know, improvise with other musicians or over song? How do you know it's going to sound good? Okay, well now this is a big deal in the improviser's mindset. How do you know it's going to sound good? And this is the really scary part. You have to figure that out for yourself. I mean, you have to listen to it and say, I like that. I like the way that sounds. Or listen to it and say, I don't like that. I don't like that sound. I want to change it. You're the composer. You're choosing the notes. Now, of course, someone else might like it or might not like it. But if you're listening, if you're audiating and you're listening to what you're doing, you decide, does this sound good? Does this sound bad? If it sounds bad, you can adjust. I can choose another note. Remember, there's only, in our Western chromatic universe, there's only 12 notes, okay? And in most songs, in most contexts, 9 of them are going to sound okay, all right? So your odds are that if you hit a bad note, you could quickly find a good note. that's going to sound okay with what you're doing, and find your way back. Of course, the better you get at listening and connecting your ear to your fingers or your mouth or whatever you use to make music with, the better you get at that, the more quickly you're going to be able to make those adjustments and set your intention. Now, of course, okay, Lucinda, I'm going to get to your question in a moment. Of course, when you're doing with other instruments, there's a constraint going on because there's other people making other sounds that create a structure. Most people, when they think about improvising, they think about that harmonic structure, the chords. How am I going to play inside that chord box? Their chords are very annoying in that way. And so how am I going to do that? How am I going to fit in there? All right, so when you're playing the piano, all right, and you want to add a harmony to that, it's the same process. And of course, we have more notes to deal with, and we have another dimension. Harmony is another dimension. And so learning to listen and hear chords is a great tool. We've got lots of stuff on Musical U about ear training for chords, hearing chord progressions. So you're going to understand, you can learn about where chords go, how they go from one thing to another, where you can learn to expect the chords. Of course, you can know the chord progression in advance. And many people do that. They learn the chord progression. And then when you're in a chord progression, that gives you certain constraints. Like, okay, you know that the tones that are in the chords are going to work. You know that certain scales are going to work with certain chords, and you can learn what those are. Again, the process of doing that, in my experience, is to start with one chord. Start with one chord, and then improvise with that one chord. Figure out what works with that chord. Then try two chords. And go between two chords, let's say the 1 chord and the 5 chord, and improvise over that. Then add a 3rd chord and learn how to do that. Practice it, of course, in different keys, different scales, to develop that ear to finger connection. For piano specifically, one thing I spent years just doing is practicing over a drone, where I'd play a single note with my left hand, or a single note in octaves, and then I would improvise with my right hand. And see how that worked. And then I would move to another note, and I would try and keep the same pitch with my right hand, see how that changed the feeling and altered it. We have an article on modal improvisation. It's called, what did I call it? Oh, the crazy, easy, weird modal improv trick. Crazy, easy, weird modal. If you just Google that, I did an article about modal improvisation for the piano. It's a great way to start getting sensitive to harmonies, and then you can build from there to chords. Okay, so Nancy Garrett, yeah, cause trouble. I mean, it causes trouble to be, you know, just again, like in music, like in life. If we're all up in our own heads and we're just like saying our own thing, like if I walk in and I'm thinking about, you know, what if I'm thinking about, you know, what my, you know, I was changing my baby's diapers and what happened. I just walk in and start yakking about that. Okay, it might not fit into the conversation, you know, and to what people are finding socially acceptable in that particular context. So it's the same thing when you're improvising with other people. Of course, you're going to adjust your improvisation to the social context of the musical structures that are being created and that you're creating together with other people. But it's the most fun thing in the world. Just like, you know, vibing off somebody, or having a conversation, or having a relationship, you know, or, you know, being in love, or having, you know, children. It's the best thing in the world. So the same thing with music, you know, get out there, relate with people. And again, just like when you were learning how to talk, the more you do it, the more you're going to learn how to make those connections. Okay. Oh, the question. So there was a question: what if you're trying to improvise with other musicians, or over a song? Why that going to sound good? I'm going to get to the business about the song in a second. And Lucinda was asking about piano. How do I put the harmonic structure together with the melodic structure, because I was talking mostly about melody. And then I want to jump back to that for a second. I played piano since I was 5, but my main instrument is the flute, and I'm a melody guy. And as a songwriter too, I find that melody is what people first hear, what they first connect with in music. Harmony comes from melody. And so if you start with your melody and start to figure out how the harmony is coming from that, it's going to make it easier to create beautiful melodies that when you're given in a harmony, to work the other way back around. Now, Nancy Garrett said, I think this would work when you're playing by yourself, but when you play with others, it could cause trouble. And that's what I was talking about. That's kind of comparing to the social situation. And all right, so I think I covered those questions. Take a breath here. All right. Okay, so I've been asked to give a few examples of playgrounds, how you can start this approach with playgrounds. Okay, so one playground that we talked about is picking certain notes, maybe a 1 note. That's your balance beam, okay? Maybe you have 3 notes. That's like, teeter-totter. 2 notes and a fulcrum in the middle. And, so you could structure it with picking certain notes. Now, another larger playground is a scale. Staying within a scale. Usually people start with the scales, but if you start with the fewer notes, it'll give you so much more when you go to your scales. But let's say you pick as a playground your scale, so that's like your ladder, okay? And playing, climbing up and down a ladder, or climbing up and down the climbing wall. The other thing you can do is you can mix and match. You could say, well, I'm going to, okay, I'll tell you what, we're going to play this game. I'm playing a diatonic instrument here, so I can't do a chromatic scale. But you can, if anyone knows out there about modes, pick a mode. Pick 3 numbers, 1 to 7, and give me a description of a rhythm. So we're going to have 3 parts to my playground. Okay, anyone have some ideas there?
I think we have a bit of delay on the live chat.
Okay.
It may take a moment for people to conjure up a mode.
All right. So I want a mode, 3 numbers, and something about rhythm, like a syncopated rhythm, or fast rhythms, or slow rhythms, or contrasting fast and slow, or staccato notes, something like that. While you're okay, here we go. 1, 6, 3. Okay, so I've got some numbers here. So I'm gonna. Does anyone have a mode there? Dorian mode. Okay. Yeah, that's Dorian mode. Okay, and 1, 6, and 3, and triplets. Okay, awesome. Okay, so that was the Dorian mode. I played the whole scale. Here's 1. There's 6. So here's the 1 of the Dorian mode, the first note, the 6th note, and okay, and then triplets is the rhythm. So that was my playground. I fell off the jungle gym once. Do you guys catch it? I played the 5 in there at one point. Anyway, so that was fun. Kind of like a Philip Glass-ish minimally minimalist improvisation. Thank you, Mitchell. Mitchell says bravo. So playgrounds can come from anywhere, any dimension of music or any building block or element of music. This word dimension, can mean like dimensions sort of geometrically, or you can think of dimensions as building blocks of music. So like, what did you learn about in music? You learned about notes, pitches, you learned about rhythm, you learn about dynamics, you learn about articulation, you learn about these elements of music, and each one of these is a block, a Lego block that you can take to build your playground. And then you go play. So that is an example of how to make a playground. All right, so all righty. So this was really fun. I'm very happy to for your feedback, your participation, your questions. Thank you so much. Thank you, Christopher, for calling me in here to jam this improv class. And I hope you guys all tune in tomorrow. Listen to Steve, because he's amazing. And I'm going to try to be there myself. And we'll see you then. I'm going to turn it back over to Christopher. Thanks a lot. Nice meeting you all.
Terrific. Thank you, Andrew. Let me see if I can bring my camera back up. Hopefully everyone is now seeing me again. Tremendous. Maggie says, I love the idea of playgrounds. It's easy to explain or understand. Terrific, Maggie. I hope you will be playing around in your new playgrounds. Don't jump off the call just yet. Everyone's saying thank you. Great. I'm glad you enjoyed the class, but hang on for a couple of moments. Nancy says, good work. This is a new way of thinking about music. It will take time for me to think this way. It's true, Nancy. For as many years as we've probably all been studying the traditional way of thinking perfectly about playing each note, this improviser's mindset will take time to adapt to. But I'm sure if you play around with these ideas, you'll quickly master it. I wanted to share a quote Mitchell put in the chat, which I think is very apt. He said, Bob Ross said that there are no mistakes, only happy accidents. And that's a terrific way to think about improvisation. I think Andrew talked a little bit there about reinterpreting good and bad. We often think about good notes and bad notes and mistakes, but actually, as he pointed out, nothing's a disaster. Music is happening on, and when you're playing a solo, if you hit a wrong note, you immediately have the opportunity to fix it. And that's wrong only in the sense of your hearing and your judgment. Bad is only what you make it. And there's always a nearby note that might save it or make it even better than you had imagined in your mind. I wanted to just throw in a couple of last things. I think Andrew did a fantastic job of explaining the play, listen, and the listen, play approaches and how audiation can help you connect those. He also explained about patterns. This is where often people get stuck with improvisation. They just play a pentatonic scale, or they just play with the notes of the melody, and that pattern is useful because it keeps you safe, but it can be very limiting too. And so we can build on those patterns with these dimensions and the different ways of thinking about what we're playing with to build a bigger playground and to have fun exploring the different areas of that playground. There were a couple of things that I think people asked about that we maybe didn't have time for, and I'll just quickly throw in hopefully a short answer. One is about how to know how it fits in with other musicians. I think Andrew gave kind of the hardline stance, which is fantastic, which is it's up to you and you need to just go with it. The slight cop-out answer, which I'll shamefully give you, is that music theory fits in a lot there. And so, studying how chord progressions work and how scales work and reading a bit about how people do pick the notes to improvise with, that can make it a lot easier. And that's a lot in the world of patterns, knowing that this pattern of notes is a safe one to use in this context. That can be a really great place to start, and it can give you confidence to improvise when you're still using your judgment and you're still experimenting, but you have a bit more confidence that, if you're up on stage doing it, you don't need to worry quite so much about the performance. The other thing is how ear training fits in. Andrew touched on this a few times. you're trusting your ears and you're making your judgments, but there is actually some formal training you can do that makes that easier. So when you first start out, you're learning gradually and you're just kind of doing it by trial and error, but you can train your ears to recognize the notes of a scale or to recognize chord progressions. And that means when you hear the chord progression in a song or you imagine the notes in your mind that you want to play, you can bring it out directly on your instrument without having to, just play notes at random and see what works. So ear training and music theory, I think of as things that can accelerate the process of getting that connection between your mind and your instrument. And the mindset of it is exactly as Andrew described. These are just ways to kind of shortcut the process and get more quickly to the kind of improvisations you want to be doing. All that remains to say is a big thank you again to Andrew for stepping in at the last minute and giving such a wonderful presentation on the fly. And thank you to everyone who joined the call live. Thank you to all those who asked questions or gave comments: Lucinda, Nancy, Maggie, Mitchell, Randall, Wim. Thank you so much. And I hope to see you all again tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.